October 27, 1659, Boston Common. Mary Dyer climbs the wooden scaffold, her hands bound, her Quaker gray dress billowing in the autumn wind. The noose tightens around her neck. Governor John Endicott watches from his carriage, unmoved. This is the third Quaker he's ordered hanged this year. But 16 years later, something impossible happens. Quakers walk freely through Boston streets. They hold meetings in homes near the State House. They conduct business in the harbor markets without fear. How did a colony that executed peaceful worshippers transform into a haven of religious tolerance? The answer lies not in enlightenment or mercy, but in economics, politics, and a crown that was watching far more closely than Massachusetts leaders ever imagined. But the truth was far more complex than simple progress would suggest. Before we uncover the truth about how Boston's Quaker persecution ended, make sure to subscribe to Sermons of Silence and ring that notification bell. We're exploring the dark corners of religious history that textbooks won't tell you. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community of history seekers around the world. The year is 1656, and the Massachusetts Bay Colony stands as a fortress of Puritan orthodoxy in the New World. Boston, with barely 3,000 souls, operates under a theocracy so strict that attendance at Sabbath services isn't just encouraged, it's legally mandated. Missing church can cost you a fine. Questioning doctrine can cost you everything. The Puritan settlers who established Massachusetts in 1630 didn't flee England seeking religious freedom in the way we understand it today. They sought freedom to practice their specific religion without compromise. The idea that all faiths deserved equal protection would have seemed as absurd to them as denying the existence of sin itself. Governor John Endicott, who takes power in 1655, embodies this rigid orthodoxy perfectly. A man of iron will and uncompromising conviction, he views the colony as a city upon a hill, a biblical metaphor Governor John Winthrop popularized, meaning a model Christian community that the world should emulate. Any deviation from approved doctrine threatens not just individual souls but the entire holy experiment. Into this controlled environment comes a new threat in July 1656. Two Quaker women, Mary Fisher and Anne Austin, arrive aboard the ship Swallow from Barbados. Before they can even disembark, colonial authorities board the vessel. The women are arrested immediately. Their crime? Possessing approximately 100 Quaker books and pamphlets. The response is swift and reveals the depth of Puritan fear. Authorities strip search both women looking for signs of witchcraft, a humiliating procedure that finds nothing. The books are burned publicly. The women are imprisoned for 5 weeks in conditions designed to break their spirits. No light, no visitors, no writing materials. The jailer is forbidden from speaking to them. When the ship's captain finally pays their jail fees and passage, they're deported back to Barbados. But the Quakers keep coming. Within weeks, 8 more Quakers arrive on the ship Speedwell. The colonial government, now thoroughly alarmed, passes the first anti-Quaker law in October 1656. The legislation is sweeping. Any ship captain bringing Quakers faces a 100-pound fine. Anyone possessing Quaker literature faces substantial penalties. Anyone defending Quaker doctrines faces banishment. The law reveals what terrifies Massachusetts leaders about Quakers. It's not just theological disagreement. Quakers reject the entire structure of Puritan society. They refuse to attend approved churches. They deny that university-trained ministers have special authority. They believe anyone, including women, can receive direct divine revelation. They won't swear oaths or show deference to magistrates by removing their hats. They call everyone thee and thou, regardless of social rank. In a hierarchical society where social order is seen as divinely ordained, Quakers represent chaos. The persecution escalates methodically. In 1657, the General Court, Massachusetts' legislative body, passes laws mandating the following punishments. First offense, 1 ear cut off. Second offense, the other ear cut off. Third offense, a hot iron bored through the tongue. These aren't theoretical threats. They're carried out. Christopher Holder, a young Quaker missionary, has his ear cut off in 1658. When he returns to preach, authorities split his tongue with a hot iron. He survives, though speaking causes him agony for the rest of his life. But even mutilation doesn't stop the Quaker influx. So in October 1658, the General Court passes a capital law. Any Quaker banished from Massachusetts who returns faces execution. The vote isn't unanimous. Some deputies voice concerns. But Governor Endicott and the clergy argue that removing this cancer requires the most extreme measures. The law passes. The first test comes quickly. William Robinson and Marmaduke Stevenson, both previously banished, return to Boston in the summer of 1659. They're arrested, tried, and sentenced to death within weeks. Mary Dyer, who was banished but returned to support imprisoned Quakers, receives the same sentence, October 27, 1659. The three are led to Boston Common. A drummer walks ahead, beating loudly to drown out any words they might speak to the crowd. Hundreds watch, some in approval, some in horror. Robinson hangs first, then Stevenson. Mary Dyer stands with the noose around her neck when her son, a respectable colonist who opposes her faith, secures a last-minute reprieve from the governor. She's released on condition she never return. She returns anyway, 8 months later. On June 1st, 1660, Mary Dyer hangs from the Boston Common Gallows. Her last words, recorded by witnesses, "Nay, I came to keep blood guiltiness from you, desiring you to repeal the unrighteous and unjust law made against the innocent servants of the Lord." One more execution follows. William Ledra, a young Quaker from Barbados, hangs in March 1661. 4 executions in 18 months. But something is shifting, and it's not happening in Boston. 3,000 miles away, in London, King Charles II has been restored to the throne after years of civil war and Puritan rule under Oliver Cromwell. Charles has no love for Puritans. They beheaded his father. And while he's no friend to Quakers particularly, he's keenly interested in asserting royal authority over wayward colonies. In September 1661, news reaches Boston that sends shockwaves through the colonial government. Charles II has issued a direct order. Massachusetts must cease executing Quakers immediately. Any Quakers currently under sentence of death must be sent to England for trial. The order is unambiguous. Edward Burroughs, a prominent Quaker in London, personally appealed to the king. Charles's response, recorded in the colonial records, makes his position clear. "I would have you well treat them, and that they be not persecuted further on religious grounds." Governor Endicott faces an impossible dilemma. Obeying the king means admitting the colony lacks the autonomy he's long claimed. Defying the king risks Massachusetts losing its charter, the legal document that grants the colony the right to exist. He chooses a middle path. Massachusetts stops hanging Quakers, but the persecution continues in every other form. Wenlock Christison, a Quaker who arrived expecting execution, is instead repeatedly whipped, imprisoned, and banished. He keeps returning. Each time he's arrested, whipped bloody, and expelled again. This becomes the new pattern. If Massachusetts can't kill Quakers, it will make their lives unendurable. The whipping post at the Boston marketplace sees constant use. Quakers are stripped to the waist and lashed. 15 lashes, 20, sometimes 39. Nay, the biblical maximum. The whippings are public spectacles, meant to deter others. But they have an unexpected effect. Some colonists begin questioning whether this treatment of peaceful people aligns with Christian principles. Not many colonists, but some. In 1662, a troubling incident occurs that reveals growing unease. When Quaker Margaret Brewster is whipped through several towns, a punishment where the victim is tied to a cart and whipped at each town boundary along a route, several residents of Dedham refuse to participate. The local constable declines to carry out the sentence. This is extraordinary. Refusing to enforce the general court's orders is itself a punishable offense. The colonial government responds by increasing fines against anyone who harbors Quakers. £5 for allowing a Quaker to hold a meeting in your home. £4 for attending a Quaker meeting. Substantial sums in an economy where a skilled craftsman might earn £30 per year. Yet some colonists pay these fines repeatedly. Nicholas Upsall, a wealthy Boston merchant and founding member of the colony, is shocked by the Quaker executions. He speaks out against them, arguing they violate Christian charity. For this, he's fined £20 and banished in 1660. He leaves Massachusetts, but his dissent plants seeds. By 1664, another pressure emerges. Charles II sends royal commissioners to investigate conditions in Massachusetts. The commissioners have broad authority to hear complaints and report back to the Crown. Among their objectives, determine whether Massachusetts is complying with the King's 1661 order regarding Quakers. The commissioners interview Quakers who've been whipped, imprisoned, and banished. They document the cart and whip law, the regulation requiring Quakers to be stripped and whipped from town to town until they reach the colony's borders. They record testimony from Elizabeth Houghton, a Quaker grandmother in her 60s who was whipped through 11 towns in the winter of 1665. Her back torn open by repeated lashings. The commissioner's report to Charles II is damning. Massachusetts, they conclude, treats the king's orders with contempt. while maintaining a veneer of compliance. But Massachusetts has powerful defenders in Parliament, including merchants with lucrative trading relationships in Boston. The colony's charter remains secure. For now, what changes the situation isn't mercy or enlightenment, it's money. By 1665, Quakers control significant portions of the transatlantic trade network. Quaker merchants in London, Bristol, and Barbados maintain extensive shipping operations. They're efficient, honest in their dealings, and their religious network provides trusted contacts in ports worldwide. Massachusetts merchants are losing business to Quaker competitors. Several Boston merchants petition the General Court to soften anti-Quaker laws, not from sympathy, but from economic self-interest. The petition carefully avoids defending Quaker theology. Instead, it argues that harsh persecution is prejudicial to the trade and commerce of the colony. The petition is rejected, but it signals something important. The economic elite increasingly view anti-Quaker persecution as counterproductive. Then comes King Philip's War. In June 1675, tensions between English colonists and Native American tribes explode into the deadliest conflict in American colonial history. Wampanoag Chief Metacomet, called King Philip by the English, leads a coalition of tribes in attacks across New England. Towns burn, hundreds die on both sides. The colonial government needs every resource it can muster. During the war, something unprecedented happens. Several Quakers volunteer for military service or contribute funds to the defense. This contradicts the Quaker peace testimony, and many Quakers refuse to participate. But those who do serve or contribute are noted by colonial authorities. More significantly, Quaker merchants and ship captains prove invaluable in maintaining supply lines. Their vessels, connections, and credit keep vital goods flowing to besieged settlements. When King Philip's War ends in August 1676, with Metacomet killed and Native American power in southern New England shattered, Massachusetts emerges devastated. The colony's population has declined, towns lie in ruins, the treasury is empty, trade has collapsed. Rebuilding requires capital and connections, and increasingly that means accommodating people the colony once tried to eliminate. In 1674, even before the war, the General Court quietly ceased enforcing the cart and whip law. Quakers are still fined for attending meetings. They still face harassment, but the systematic physical brutality stops. By 1675, small Quaker communities exist openly in Salem, where merchant William Hathorne, ancestor of novelist Nathaniel Hawthorne, who would add the W to the family name, is more concerned with trade than doctrine. Quakers meet in Lynn, in Cambridge, in Watertown, not in grand meeting houses but in private homes. Still technically illegal but increasingly tolerated, in Boston itself something extraordinary is happening. Quaker merchants Samuel Shattuck and Nicholas Phelps conduct business from shops near the harbor. They're known Quakers. Everyone knows they attend meetings. Yet they're not arrested, not fined, not expelled. Why? Because they're successful merchants whose ships and goods the colony needs. The transformation isn't official. The laws remain on the books. The General Court doesn't repeal anti-Quaker legislation, but enforcement becomes selective, sporadic, and increasingly rare. The moment of true recognition comes not with a dramatic proclamation, but through accumulated small changes that finally become undeniable. In September 1675, a Quaker wedding takes place in Salem, not hidden in a basement, not conducted hurriedly before authorities arrive. Samuel Shattuck marries Priscilla Fraser in a ceremony attended by dozens, held in a merchant's home near the harbor, with guests arriving openly through the front door. Local magistrates know about it. Neighbors witness the comings and goings. Yet no one is arrested, no fines are levied. The wedding proceeds, concludes, and the couple begins their married life unmolested. This wouldn't have been possible 5 years earlier. It would have been unthinkable. 10 years earlier, colonial records from this period reveal the shift. In 1670, Boston courts handled 47 cases involving Quaker-related offenses, attending meetings, harboring Quakers, refusing oaths. In 1675, that number drops to 7. In 1676, to 3. The decline isn't because there are fewer Quakers. Quaker population in Massachusetts actually increases during this period. The decline represents a conscious decision by local authorities to stop prosecuting cases they increasingly view as more trouble than they're worth. A fascinating entry appears in the Boston Town Records from October 1675. A Quaker merchant named John Love purchases property on what's now State Street, in the heart of Boston's commercial district. The deed is recorded without comment. The town clerk doesn't note Love's religion. The selectmen don't object. He's simply recorded as John Love, merchant. That designation, merchant rather than Quaker, marks a profound shift. Identity is being redefined. Economic role is superseding religious affiliation in official records. Historian Carla Pestana, in her research on early American religious liberty, identifies 1675 as the pivot year when persecution gave way to pragmatic tolerance in Massachusetts. She notes that this tolerance remains limited and conditional but represents a fundamental break from the theocratic ideal that justified executing Mary Dyer. The clearest evidence comes from meeting records. Quakers keep meticulous notes of their gatherings. The Salem Quarterly Meeting records from November 1675 list 30s. Even attendees, including several from Boston. They meet for an entire weekend, Saturday and Sunday, discussing theology, business, and community matters. Such a gathering would have resulted in mass arrests and fines just a few years earlier. Now it proceeds without interference. Even more remarkable, the meeting records show Quakers discussing civil matters, settling business disputes between members, providing financial support for widows, organizing apprenticeships for Quaker youth. They're functioning as a parallel community structure, performing many of the same social welfare and regulatory functions as Puritan churches and town meetings. The colonial government, occupied with post-war Reconstruction, allows this parallel structure to operate, but tolerance isn't the same as acceptance. Quakers can't vote, they can't hold public office, they can't testify in court if it requires an oath, and Quakers refuse all oaths on religious grounds. When Harvard College receives its charter in 1650, it explicitly excludes Quakers from admission. That provision remains in force. The Crown continues watching Massachusetts closely. In 1676, Edward Randolph arrives as a royal customs officer with expanded authority to investigate colonial compliance with English law. Randolph is hostile to Massachusetts's pretensions of autonomy, and he interviews numerous Quakers about their treatment. His reports back to London acknowledge that executions have ceased and whippings have stopped, but he notes that Quakers remain second-class subjects, unable to fully participate in civic life. Randolph recommends that Massachusetts lose its charter and become a royal colony under direct Crown control. The threat is real enough that the General Court takes unprecedented action. In 1677, it formally repeals several anti-Quaker laws, including provisions for ear cropping and tongue boring. The capital law is repealed. The cart and whip law is struck from the books. What remains are fines and prohibitions on Quaker worship in public buildings. But even these are rarely enforced. The repeal doesn't come with apology or acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The General Court's language is purely procedural, whereas certain laws regarding Quakers have proven impractical to enforce. They frame it as a pragmatic adjustment, not a moral reckoning. Some Quakers push for more. They want compensation for those whipped, imprisoned, and banished. They want public acknowledgement that the executions were unjust. They petition the General Court repeatedly. These petitions are denied. Massachusetts will tolerate Quakers. It will not apologize to them. Yet the community slowly transforms. By 1680, Boston has approximately 100 Quakers living openly within its bounds. They constitute perhaps 3% of the population, a small minority but a visible and economically significant one. The most prominent is John Hull, a goldsmith and merchant who converts to Quakerism in 1677. Hull previously served as treasurer of the Massachusetts Bay Colony and was one of Boston's wealthiest citizens. His conversion is shocking to his former Puritan associates, but Hull faces no legal consequences. His business continues to thrive. Hull's conversion matters because it demonstrates that Quakerism is attracting not just outsiders and radicals, but established colonists who find Puritan orthodoxy increasingly stifling. This internal conversion, more than any royal order or economic pressure, signals that the theocratic consensus is fracturing. By 1682, Quakers feel secure enough to construct their first purpose-built meeting house in Massachusetts. It's not in Boston, that remains too provocative, but in Salem, where merchant influence is strongest. The building is modest, a simple wooden structure that could pass for a warehouse from the outside. But it's a meeting house, with benches arranged for worship and separate sections for men and women, as Quaker custom requires. No. One attempts to shut it down. Salem's magistrates issue no warrants. The meeting house stands. 2 years later, in 1684, the unthinkable happens. Massachusetts Bay Colony loses its charter. Charles II, frustrated by the colony's continued defiance on multiple issues, including treatment of Quakers, but also customs violations and territorial disputes, revokes the charter that granted Massachusetts self-government. The colony becomes part of the short-lived Dominion of New England, ruled by Royal Governor Edmund Andros. Andros, representing Crown policy, mandates religious tolerance. When he arrives in Boston in 1686, one of his first acts is to demand that Puritans share their Old South meeting house with Anglican services. Puritans are outraged, but powerless to resist. For Quakers, the Dominion period brings unprecedented freedom. Andros confirms their right to worship openly. Quaker merchants gain equal legal standing in courts. The remaining discriminatory laws are suspended. The Dominion collapses in 1689 when William and Mary take the English throne in the Glorious Revolution. Massachusetts receives a new charter in 1691, restoring much of its self-government. But the new charter includes a provision that would have been revolutionary in 1660, guaranteed liberty of conscience for all Protestant Christians, including Quakers. The theocracy is dead. Not because Puritans embraced tolerance, but because they lost the power to enforce uniformity. The Massachusetts experience with Quakers reveals fundamental truths about how tolerance emerges in societies. First, tolerance rarely springs from moral enlightenment. It comes from pragmatic calculation. Massachusetts didn't stop persecuting Quakers because leaders suddenly realized persecution was wrong. They stopped because persecution became too costly, economically, politically, and diplomatically. Second, economic integration precedes social acceptance. Quakers gained grudging tolerance by becoming indispensable to trade networks before they gained respect for their beliefs. They proved their usefulness before proving their worthiness. Third, external pressure matters enormously. Without the Crown watching, enforcing orders, and threatening the charter, Massachusetts would likely have continued persecution far longer. Minority rights often require protection from a higher authority that can override local majorities. Fourth, formal legal equality and actual social acceptance are different things. Even after laws changed, Quakers faced social stigma for decades. Many Puritan families forbade their children from associating with Quaker youth. Intermarriage between Puritans and Quakers remained scandalous through the 1690s. The trajectory Massachusetts followed, from execution to tolerance, would be replicated in other contexts. The same pattern appears in later American history regarding Catholics, Jews, Mormons, and other religious minorities. First comes violent persecution, then grudging tolerance driven by practical considerations, then formal legal equality, and finally, sometimes, genuine social acceptance. That final stage often takes generations. The transformation in Massachusetts helped establish a precedent that would prove crucial for American religious liberty. When the First Amendment guaranteed free exercise of religion in 1791, it built on 50 years of gradual accommodation that began with events like those in 1675 Boston. But we must be careful not to view this history as inevitable progress. Quakers gained tolerance in Massachusetts partly through persistence and moral courage, but also through fortunate timing, economic leverage, and royal intervention. Change any of those variables. Imagine Charles II was less concerned with colonial control, or Quakers lacked commercial networks, or King Philip's War never depleted Massachusetts's resources, and the outcome could have been very different. The Quakers who suffered in Massachusetts, Mary Dyer swinging far. The Gallows, Christopher Holder with his mutilated tongue, Elizabeth Houghton whipped through 11 towns in winter, didn't die or suffer because tolerance was impossible. They suffered because people with power chose persecution and kept choosing it until external forces made it untenable. That's a sobering lesson. Tolerance isn't a natural human instinct that emerges once ignorance is dispelled. It's a political settlement, constantly negotiated, always fragile, dependent on power dynamics that can shift. What do you think finally convinced Massachusetts leaders that tolerance was preferable to persecution? Was it the royal pressure from Charles II, the economic benefits of trade with Quaker merchants, the exhaustion from King Philip's War, or something else entirely? Drop your theories in the comments below. And if you found this exploration of how religious tolerance actually emerged in early America valuable, make sure you're subscribed to Sermons of Silence. We're uncovering the complex, often uncomfortable truths about faith, power, and persecution throughout history. Share this with anyone interested in religious history or the founding of American liberty. The real story, not the sanitized version. Next time, we're exploring the Salem witch trials and the economic factors that historians rarely discuss. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep questioning the narratives.